Imagine being told something is so safe, you can put it in your mouth. So safe that your employer encourages it. So safe that you're told it's practically healthy. Now imagine that same substance slowly hollowing out your bones. In the early 1900s, young women across America were hired for what seemed like one of the most desirable factory jobs of the time. It was clean work, it paid well, and it glowed. They were known as the dial painters, and they would become known as the Radium Girls. The year was 1917. The world was at war. Soldiers needed watches they could read in the dark. The answer came in the form of a miraculous new substance, radium. Discovered only a few decades earlier, radium was considered almost magical. It glowed with a soft, ghostly green light. Scientists were fascinated. The public was enchanted. Radium was added to toothpaste, to cosmetics, to health tonics. People drank it in bottled water, believing it boosted vitality. Wealthy elites carried radium-lined accessories as status symbols. The future, it seemed, was radioactive. So when companies like the United States Radium Corporation began hiring young women to paint watch dials with luminous radium paint, the job felt modern, prestigious even. In factories across New Jersey, Illinois, and Connecticut, rows of teenage girls and young women sat at long tables with tiny brushes, carefully painting glowing numbers onto watch faces. The technique they were taught was simple: lip, dip, paint. To keep the brush tips fine enough for delicate numbers, supervisors instructed the girls to place the brushes between their lips, twisting them to a sharp point, then dip into the glowing paint, then paint the dial. Lip, dip, paint. They did it dozens of times per dial, hundreds of times per day. No one warned them. In fact, when some workers hesitated, they were reassured. Radium, they were told, was harmless in such small amounts. Some managers even joked that it was good for them. The girls laughed as well. At night, they would leave work dusted in luminous powder. In the dark, their hair shimmered. Their dresses glowed faintly. They would paint their nails with leftover radium for fun, smiling at the strange beauty of it. They were called the Ghost Girls because they quite literally shone in the darkness. But inside their bodies, something far less beautiful was happening. At first, it was subtle: a toothache, a sore jaw, a strange fatigue that wouldn't go away. Then teeth began to loosen. Dentists pulled them, assuming simple infection. But the sockets did not heal. Instead, the pain deepened. The gums decayed. Abscesses formed. In some cases, pieces of jawbone began to detach. Doctors were confused. The young women were otherwise healthy. Many were barely out of their teens. Yet their bones seemed to be rotting from within. The truth was that radium behaves like calcium. When ingested, the body absorbs it into the bones. There, it emits radiation continuously, silently damaging tissue and bone marrow. The girls had been swallowing radium every single day, and now it was embedded inside them. One worker, Amelia Maggia, was among the first to fall severely ill. Her teeth began to ache in 1922. Within months, her jaw deteriorated so badly that fragments of bone had to be removed. When doctors operated, her jawbone reportedly crumbled beneath their instruments. She died at 24. Her death certificate listed syphilis as the cause. It was not an accident. As more women fell sick, the company faced a choice: admit responsibility or protect profits. They chose the latter. Internal company scientists had already begun noticing disturbing patterns. Laboratory tests suggested radium was dangerous when ingested. Male researchers handling radium were given protective gear: lead aprons, tongs, shields. The dial painters were given nothing. When the sick women sought answers, the company denied everything. Independent doctors hired by the corporation insisted the illnesses were unrelated to radium exposure. Some women were publicly accused of immoral behavior to discredit them. It was easier to ruin their reputations than admit fault. Meanwhile, the suffering grew worse. Bones fractured with minimal force. Spines collapsed. Anemia set in as bone marrow was destroyed. Tumors formed in jaws and limbs. Some women developed such severe necrosis that parts of their faces were surgically removed, and still, radium continued glowing inside them. In the mid-1920s, 5 women from New Jersey decided to fight back. They were gravely ill. Some could barely walk. One had to be carried into the courtroom, but they sued the United States Radium Corporation. It was nearly impossible. At the time, workplace protections for women were minimal. Corporations held enormous power. The statute of limitations had nearly expired because the effects of radiation poisoning took years to appear. The company used delay tactics, hoping the women would die before the case concluded, and some did, but public opinion began to shift. Newspaper headlines exposed the horrors. Photographs showed frail young women who once glowed with youth, now gaunt and broken. The case became a national scandal. Finally, in 1928, the company settled out of court. Each woman received $10,000, far less than what many had already spent on medical care, along with a small annual payment and coverage for medical expenses. It was not justice in the fullest sense, but it was acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement changed everything. The Radium Girls' fight forced the United States to confront the dangers of radiation. It helped establish scientific understanding of occupational radiation exposure. It strengthened workers' rights and laid groundwork for modern labor safety laws. Before them, companies could hide behind ignorance. After them, they could not as easily pretend. The tragedy also reshaped how corporations were held accountable for long-term harm. It became a precedent. Even if damage takes years to appear, responsibility remains. But for the women themselves, reform came too late. Many continued to deteriorate long after the settlement. Some survived into middle age, living with chronic pain, skeletal deformities, and repeated surgeries. Others died young, their bodies weakened beyond repair. And yet, even in suffering, they refused silence. They testified, they documented, they made sure the truth glowed brighter than the lies. There is something especially haunting about their story. Radium was beautiful, mesmerizing. It shimmered softly in the dark. It represented progress, science, the future. The girls believed in that future. They believed in their employers. They believed in the promise of modernity. Instead, they were poisoned by it. The glow that once made them feel glamorous became a symbol of betrayal. And perhaps that is what makes this story linger. Not just the horror of bones dissolving, not just the corporate cover-up, but the innocence. They were teenagers, young women supporting families, proud to have good-paying jobs during a difficult era. They trusted authority. They trusted science as it was presented to them. They trusted the word safe. And in the quiet of those factories, under bright electric lights, with fine brushes between their lips, they swallowed a future that would kill them. Lip, dip, paint, over and over. Today, the factories are long closed. Radium is handled with strict regulation. The dial painters' names are recorded in history books, in court documents, in museum exhibits about workplace safety. But their story still feels disturbingly modern, because it asks a question that echoes forward in time. When profit and safety collide, who is protected, and who is told not to worry? The Radium Girls were not soldiers. They were not criminals. They were not rebels. They were workers. And they became unwilling pioneers in the fight for corporate accountability. Their bones carried the evidence. Their lawsuits carried the change. And their glow, once a symbol of wonder, became a warning. A reminder that progress without caution can turn deadly. A reminder that trust, once broken, can cost lives. And a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous things do not look frightening at all. Sometimes they shine.